Right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's session on how to get published in academic journals. My name is Alex Gould. I'm one of the organisers and I'm going to be moderating today's session. Shortly, I will hand over to my colleague, Anna Savage, who you can see on screen. Anna's the Journal Publishing Manager, Assistant at Wiley, and is today's presenter. This webinar is part of an ongoing series of publishing webinars, so there'll be more sessions if you know of other colleagues who might be interested. If you've got questions during the presentation, you should have the option on your screen to type them in on the chat function, and then we'll answer these at the end. The presentation will take around 35-40 minutes. We're also recording the session, as you heard, and we'll make it available via email within the next few days. You can also download the PDF of the presentation, which has been uploaded to the session. And we'll also give an opportunity to get a certificate of attendance. So with that, I'll hand over to Anna to get started.
Thank you, Alex, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for coming. So as Alex said, I'm a journals publishing assistant here at Wiley, and I work in the social sciences and humanities team, and I'll be presenting today on how to get published in academic journals. So I'm just going to turn my camera off while I present, and then I'll put it back on later for the Q&A. So first, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of today's session. We'll be covering all stages of the publishing process. Firstly, we're going to consider what you need to do during the writing process and before submitting to a journal. Then we'll look at how the submission process works so that it can go as smoothly as possible for you, and then what you can prepare for after publication. We'll also take a look at open access, explaining what it is and how it's going to affect you, because it's a really important topic in publishing at the moment, and you need to be aware of it if you're trying to get your article published. So you might ask, why should you publish your work? Well, firstly, having your work published establishes that you're the author of your findings. If you never publish your work, then you won't receive ownership of what you've found. Secondly, publishing your work means that you will then be recognised by your peers for your contribution to your field. Thirdly, an important fact to be aware of is that getting published is essential to developing your career as a researcher. Being published can help you secure a promotion and help you get funding because it shows what you've accomplished. This is why you might hear the phrase, publish or perish. Without publishing your work, your peers will have no idea what it is that you've been working on. So it really is essential to get published in order to progress in your career. And finally, there's your responsibility to publish. Publishing an article makes a contribution to your field, and it allows you to give back to the community and also to the institution who have supported you along the way. And they might have even provided funding in order to make it happen. For this reason, publishing can be seen as your responsibility. So before publication, we're first going to look at what you should consider before you try to get published. In this phase, you're going to be writing your article, and it's important to make sure that you're thinking about where you might want to submit it. So the first thing to decide is, what are you writing? You need to start thinking about this before you start writing and keep thinking about it after you've finished. The first question to ask yourself before you sit down to write an article is, what type of article is this that I'm writing? There's a lot of different article types out there, which might be different depending on the subject area that you're working in. Is it an original article? Is it a book review? And so on. The reason that this is so important is that not every journal publishes every type of article, so it's important to be self-aware while you write. If a journal doesn't publish the type of article you've written, then you won't be able to submit it there. Next, who are you writing for? You might want to think about who you want to read your article and who would find it useful, and what article type would be best suited to those readers. Where will they go looking for it? If the answer isn't in a journal, then there may be other places for you to publish. Another thing for you to think about is what will make this publication successful for you. What are you hoping to get out of this? Do you want your work to be cited by academics in other journals? Or do you want to see it gain attention on social media or in the news? You should keep all these things in mind as you're writing, so that once you've finished, you're aware of what it is you've written and what to do next. This way, you can make sure that your research ends up in the best place for it to succeed. The next thing you need to do is find the journal to submit your article to. And you might be wondering, how do you choose one? There are lots and lots of journals out there, and it might be overwhelming to decide on just one. Or you might not even know where to look for a journal in the first place. There are a few questions that you can ask yourself so that you can generate a list of potential journals. Firstly, where do you read papers related to your research? Which papers have you cited in your own article? Have a look through your references and see which journals they're coming from. What do your peers suggest and where have they published before? And finally, where does your supervisor want you to publish? They might have a good idea of suitable journals for your work. There are also journal finders out there, usually on publisher websites or subject-specific sites like blogs. The example I've got here is the Wiley Journal Finder. These are search tools specifically made to help you find the right journal for your research. And how this works is that you enter your manuscript title, your abstracts and any keywords, and then you'll be given a list of suggestions of journals that might be suited to your work. So you might now be thinking, okay, I have this list of journals that I might want to publish in. How do I narrow it down to just one? And how do I make sure that that's the right one for my work? There are lots of other considerations to take into account that should make this decision a lot easier. Firstly, the aims and scope of the journal. This is one of the most important things to be aware of. Every journal has an aims and scope, which will tell you exactly what topics they publish on and what perspectives they're looking for. You should make sure that whatever your article is about, it matches the aims and scope of the journal that you submit to. Another thing to consider are review and publication timescales. It's going to take time for your article to be peer-reviewed and published, and this turnaround time might be important if you need your work to be published quickly. The likelihood of acceptance. Everyone wants to publish in a top journal, but you need to be realistic about where you might be accepted. And finally, article types. We already mentioned article types and how important they are, and you need to make sure that if you're submitting, for example, a book review, that the journal does in fact publish book reviews, or you will just be immediately rejected. And what else? These final three considerations are all about what you want to get out of publishing your article. So is that impact? Are you looking for your work to be cited by other academics? So you might want a journal with a high citation score, such as a high impact factor or a high cite score. You might want to get attention on social media. So does the journal have a strong social media presence? And will the journal provide opportunities for you to share your content online? And finally, accessibility. For example, are the journal's readers from the same part of the world where you want your work to be read? Or does the journal publish open access articles? And open access is something that we're going to come back to talk about at the end of the session. Next, we're going to look at the structure of a research article. Please keep in mind that not every article should be structured in exactly this way, and this will depend on your subject area as well as the type of article that you're writing. This just reflects the standard structure. So first we have your title, which is followed by an abstract, your introduction, your method, your results and discussion, and your conclusion. And then you might have your references and any acknowledgements. You should always read the author submission guidelines of the journal to make sure that the structure of your article aligns with any preferences that the journal might have, and also that they haven't asked for anything extra that you might not have included. Reading the author guidelines is really important, and we're going to come back to this later on. Next, we're going to take a look at titles. So this is the first thing that a reader is going to see, and this will determine whether they read your article. It's also the first thing that an editor will see and a reviewer, so it's important to make the right first impression. So what makes a good article title? You should keep it short. You want to make it easy for people to see what your article is actually about, and you should try to keep it between 10 and 20 substantial words. You should include your keywords and make sure that they're upfront so that they're easily findable in Google searches. Your title should clearly state a key finding or ask a question. You should use the current terminology in your field of study, whatever that might be. And finally, try to stimulate reader interest. Like I said before, this is the first thing that readers, editors, and reviewers will see. If your article doesn't sound interesting, there's less chance that people will want to read it, or maybe even publish it. So your abstract is the next most important thing when it comes to attracting readers and making sure that people will find your article in search engines. Along with the title, the abstract is the first thing a reader will see, and it might decide whether they continue to read the entire article. You can see here how you might structure your abstract to help with this. You should put something important and new at the beginning, since this is the part that will be displayed in search engines before people click on your article. Don't make the middle part longer than necessary. Repeat your keywords throughout the abstract to increase the chances of your article being picked up by search engines. As you can see in the example on the slide, the highlighted keywords are repeated throughout. This might seem a bit repetitive, but it will help people who are interested in your subject area find your article on search engines. And we'll talk a bit more about search engine optimization next. You should remember that the purpose of your abstract is to highlight the main points of your research clearly and concisely, not to go into too much depth. You can do that in the main body of your article. Another section of your article that you need to pay a lot of attention to is the references. More mistakes are found in this section than in any other part of most papers. So it's important to make sure that these are accurate and consistent. Your references should also be in the reference style used by the journal that you're submitting to. You can find out what that is in the author guidelines, and you might need to reformat your references before submitting. You should make sure that you've cited all the papers on which your work is based. Make sure your citations are relevant. It won't help to have lots and lots of citations if they're not actually being used. But that being said, you should always cite a work you are using in order to avoid plagiarism. You can always take out a citation later on if you realise that it's not really necessary. If you have published any papers in the past, then you should try to avoid excessive self-citations. And finally, most journals are international. If you can, you should avoid excessively citing publications from a single region where possible. The importance of search engine optimization. The reason that this is important is that more and more people are finding articles using Google or other search tools. They're not flipping through an entire journal issue looking for an article. I've already mentioned that you should be placing keywords in your title and abstract, and this is because search engines will pick up on those words that are most used in order to match someone's search with the results. The words in the title and the abstract are the most important, and this is because they're not usually behind a paywall, and Google can easily pull them out. But it's also good practice to use your keywords consistently through your article. You should think about what your keywords are by considering your topic and the findings of your article, and this is something you'll need to think about while writing and before you submit. How to get published when English is not your primary language. So it might be that English is not your first language, but because most of the academic journals in the world are published in English, you will likely need to write in the English language if you want to publish in them. There are some things you can do to help if this is the case. You should read widely, read other articles in your subject field so that you're familiar with how they're written. You should keep the language as clear and simple as possible and use the first person active voice. Don't try to overcomplicate the language and risk making errors or making your writing hard to understand. It's better to be clear and simple. You should make a note of the preferred terminology in the journal you're submitting to and use repositories to find this terminology. You might want to consider using a translation service. And finally, you could also ask the journal's editors if they'll publish in your preferred language. More journals are starting to do this. Even if they won't publish the full article in your preferred language, then there's a chance that they might publish the abstract, and it never hurts to ask the editors. So, additional considerations. The final thing to take into consideration is to make sure that you're avoiding plagiarism. Plagiarism is taking the work of another academic and not referencing them or giving them the proper credit. You should be aware that most journals now use a tool, such as Authenticate, which is the example I've got here, to automatically check new submissions for plagiarism. This will look for text matches against other published articles and will alert the editor if there's a high percentage of matches. Phrases and odd sentences might be picked up and this can be fine, but entire paragraphs are problematic, and if this happens, your article could be investigated. This is why you need to think about this before you submit and make sure that your citations are accurate. Something perhaps less talked about is self-plagiarism. You should avoid reusing text from your own papers that you've had published in the past, and any borrowing from previous work needs to be properly cited, even when it's your own. So by now we've covered the pre-submission process, and your paper should be ready to be submitted to your chosen journal. I'll now look at the submission process itself, including how to submit your article online, what peer review is, and how it works. The very first thing that you need to do once you've chosen the journal you want to submit to is to read the author guidelines. I've already referred to these several times in the course of today, but to explain a little bit more, the author guidelines are the instructions that every journal has on their website in order to guide authors through the submission process. The guidelines will tell you where to submit your paper, what article types are accepted, and how long it might take for your article to be published. You should always read these guidelines before submission. If your paper isn't one of the article types accepted by the journal, or it isn't formatted correctly, it could be immediately rejected by an editor, and you'll have wasted your time by submitting it. You should look out for formatting and style requirements, any word limits, how to include figures and tables, whether you need to include a title page, and any other requirements. One thing you should look out for is whether the journal offers free format submission. This is something that more and more journals are doing, where you don't need to format your paper exactly to a journal's requirements before submitting. You can submit in any format or style as long as it's readable. But this is something that you need to check for, and you can never assume that a journal has it in place. To know for sure, you have to read the author guidelines for that journal. So how do you actually submit your manuscript? Most journals now use an electronic editorial office, or EEO, such as Scholar One manuscripts, which is the example I've got here. This means that you can submit your manuscript easily online. You'll usually need to create an account, and once you've done that, you can log in, follow the instructions, fill in your details, and upload your manuscript. You'll also have the option to log in with your Orcid ID. An Orcid ID is a number which is completely unique to you, and you can register at Orcid for free. It's an identifier which will distinguish you from other researchers, and it will be attached to any articles you publish, connecting you with your research activity. For some journals, an Orcid ID is becoming mandatory, and it's really easy to go and get one. Your ORCID profile is visible to all, and it's a valuable promotional tool to gain recognition for your achievements. And this is why we really recommend every researcher to have one. So it's likely that at this stage, your article will then be submitted for peer review. Peer review is the evaluation of work by one or more people of similar competence to the producers of the work. So your peers, other researchers in your field, are now going to read your work and decide whether it's fit for publication. So what's assessed? Peer reviewers will consider whether your work is true, is it credible, is it important and relevant, has it been communicated effectively in a way that's understandable, is the research novel or has it been done before, and is there any chance of plagiarism? And why is all of this assessed? Peer review is needed in order to verify and improve your research. The reviewers will check your interpretation of your results and your reasoning, and they'll check that the presentation is okay. And they'll also offer you constructive feedback so that you can improve your work. And they might note down whether there's any new or additional ideas that you might have missed. So here's a diagram which shows the different stages of peer review. You need to be aware that this process might look slightly different at different journals, but this shows a standard process, and it's important to familiarise yourself with these different stages. So first, the author submits an article and it will be assessed by the editor. It could then be immediately rejected, which we call a desk reject. This could be because the journal doesn't publish this article type or the formatting was not in line with their requirements. But the number one reason why a paper is desk rejected is because it doesn't fit the aims and scope of the journal. I mentioned this earlier on, and it really can't be emphasized enough that your article needs to fit within what the journal publishes. You need to read the aims and scope thoroughly and make sure that your article doesn't fall outside of this area. This can be quite nuanced. For example, a journal might reject your article not because it doesn't publish on your subject area in general, but because, for example, your article focuses on only one country, whereas the journal has clearly stated in its aims and scope that it requires all articles to have an international focus or an international relevance. If there's no reason for a desk reject, the editor will send your article out to reviewers to be assessed. These reviews are returned to the editor, who will decide on the next course of action depending on the result of the review. The editor might decide that the article isn't publishable and reject it. The article might be sent back to the author for further revisions, and the author will then revise the manuscript and resubmit. At this point, it could go out for review a second time if needed, and this process can be repeated many times until the editor decides that the revisions have succeeded in getting the article up to a publishable standard. The editor could decide that the article is ready to be published after the first round of peer review with no revisions. However, this is really, really rare, and you should be prepared for even minor revisions at the very least. And then once an article is accepted, it's sent on to production, who prepare it for typesetting. I've got here some tips to help you survive peer review. Receiving critical feedback can be incredibly difficult, and it's understandable that you might struggle with this area of the process. You should try to accept feedback as a learning experience and understand that the reviewers are just trying to help you improve your paper. Remember, very few submissions are accepted unconditionally. As I said before, almost every single paper undergoes revision at this stage, and it's safe to say that almost every author of the papers you read and cite have undergone the same experience, no matter how well cited their paper is now or how well respected the author is in their field. Everyone has to undergo peer review. You should seek help with language and statistics if you need it. Be persistent. Don't wait to revise your paper. Even though it might be difficult to read the feedback, the longer you avoid completing the revisions, the longer the whole process is going to take. whereas the faster you respond to the editor, the faster you'll be published. And remember to celebrate your accomplishments. Once you've received peer review, you're one step closer to being published. The next thing that I'm going to talk about are journal transfer networks. Many journals are now part of a transfer network, and it's really important to be aware of what one is. You'll probably find that more and more journals are going to be a part of such a network as time goes on. If a journal is in one of these networks, then after the editorial evaluation, if the manuscript is not a good fit for that journal, the editor might suggest a transfer to assist the journal. So how does this work exactly? So how this works is that if your paper has been submitted to Journal A, but it gets rejected at any stage of the submission process, whether that's before or after peer review, the editor might reject your article with a transfer offer. What this means is that the editor might think your article is good, but it's not quite right for their journal for whatever reason. So they transfer it to another journal, Journal B. The author will receive this suggestion first, and you'll have the chance to review Journal B before deciding whether to accept the transfer or not. It's really important that the author always has the final decision on whether to be transferred. The advantages of this is that you might receive a transfer offer to a journal that could be a really good fit for your article, but you didn't know about it. It will also save you time, because you won't have to resubmit your article manually again, or reformat it according to Journal B's guidelines. And finally, if the article has already been peer reviewed, then the peer review will also be transferred with the article, which saves a lot of time. You need to be aware, though, that there's no guarantee that Journal B will now accept your article. It will still be subject to the editor's decision, as in any other submission process. So this is a simplified production workflow, and it shows you what happens from the time when your article has been accepted to it being published online. Journals will often have slightly different production workflows, but every journal will include these stages in some form, even if the order is slightly different. So this should at least give you a good idea of what to expect. The article will be sent to the production editor once it's accepted, and it will be booked in, copy edited, and typeset. The proofs will be created, usually in HTML and PDF formats, for you to check. And then the revised proof will be created and typeset again, and then the production editor will do the final check. And then the article will be published online. There's a few important things for you to remember at this stage. The first is that you must check the proofs. You shouldn't just assume that everything is fine. As the author of your article, you're in the best position to spot errors, and you need to take care to prevent them from going into the final published version. Once your article has been published, it's going to be very difficult to make changes or correct any errors. You should be mindful of turnaround times. The longer it takes for you to respond to the production editor, the longer it will take for your article to be published. And finally, be aware that articles rarely go straight into an issue. In most cases, your article will be published online, and then it will be included in a later issue of the journal. So now that you're a published author, there are things that you can do for your article after publication around promotion and impact, so that you can make sure that it's as successful as possible. So this is an overview of 9 different promotional tools that you can use in order to maximize the impact of your published research. So first, we have search engine optimization. We've already discussed this, and by now, your article should be optimized and ready to make the most of search engines. Secondly, we have conferences. Can you promote your article at the next conference you go to? Publicity. Is your article newsworthy, and could it be picked up in the news? Networking. Talk to your peers, whether it's in person or on academic social networking sites. If you have a blog, then post about your article there. The wider web. Make sure you update your institutional page with your recent publications and to register for an ORCID ID so that your research is easily findable. Multimedia. More researchers are creating, for example, video abstracts to go along with their articles, which can increase their readership figures. Email. Put the article in your email signature so that everyone who you email can see it. Article sharing. With Wiley content sharing, for example, you can create a link to share your article for free with anyone who might want to read it. Other publishers will probably have a similar service. And finally, social media. You should share your article on Twitter and engage with the publisher and journal accounts wherever you can, as well as your university or faculty pages. So we've reached the final part of the session today. I'm now going to move on to talk about open access in 2022. You've probably heard a lot of people talking about this, but you might not quite understand what it is or how it affects you. But it's becoming more and more important for researchers to have an understanding of open access, which is why I wanted to cover it today. Open access is the #1 most important development in academic publishing at the moment, but it can be quite intimidating or overwhelming to learn about it, especially if you don't know where to go to get this information. We'll just cover some basic open access terminology today and give you a brief overview so that you can go away and learn more about it after today's session. So what is open access? Open access is a set of principles and a range of practices through which research outputs are distributed online, free of cost or other access barriers. With open access, barriers to copying or reuse are also reduced or removed by applying an open license for copyright. So open access is research that is available online, it's available for free, and it's available to be reused for free without requesting the copyright. However, there are different types of open access, and I'm just going to cover the 2 most common types. Firstly, we have green open access. Green open access is where the author self-archives their article in an online repository or website. It will then be available for free, and the article will still exist behind a paywall on the publisher's website. However, there are some restrictions around when an author can do this, and these will vary depending on your subject area or your publisher. Usually, the author can only archive the article after an embargo period has passed from when the article was first published. And this is usually between 12 and 24 months. The version archived is usually the submitted version on acceptance, so before typesetting and copy editing have happened. And in this case, a standard CTA or ELA license is used, and there's no cost associated with green open access. Gold open access is what most people think of when they think of open access. This is when the author or the author's funder or institution pays what we call an article publication charge, an APC. And the article is published free to read, download and use immediately. The cost of an APC does vary by journal, but this will be listed either on the journal's webpage or on the publisher's website, so you can go and find out the price of an APC in the journal you might want to submit to. This type of open access is available in 2 types of journal. Firstly, a fully open access journal, where every single article is published open access, or in a subscription journal that offers an open access journal, that offers open access articles, but still publishes regular articles, which is what we call a hybrid journal. In gold open access, a Creative Commons license is used, which allows people to reuse and share the article for free, as long as it's still cited. So at the moment, lots of publishers are signing what we call transitional agreements. I'm going to briefly explain what they are because they might help you get your article published open access at no direct cost to you. So what is a transitional agreement? They're contracts between a university and a publisher that transition journals publishing away from the subscription model, where articles are behind a paywall, to a model where publishers are paid to publish articles open access, and readers can access the published work for free. This enables institutions, researchers, and publishers to transition to a more open future in a sustainable way. So how do these work? So there's two types of transitional agreements, a read and publish or a publish and read. A read and publish is where a publisher receives payment for providing read access to their journals and a payment for publishing articles open access. And over the term of this agreement, the payment for publishing increases while the payment for reading decreases. So more and more of the money goes towards funding open access. An example of this is Wiley's agreement with JISC in the UK. This is the format of most transitional agreements that are being signed. The publish and read type is an agreement in which the publisher receives payment only for publishing open access articles, and reading is included for no additional cost. An example of this is Wiley's agreement with Project Deal in Germany. Both types of agreement mean that if you're at a university or other type of institution which is covered by one of these agreements, then you might be able to publish your research open access at no direct cost to you. So how many of these agreements are there? According to the ESAC registry, which is a website where you can go and view all the different agreements that are out there, there's currently over 437. Every big academic publisher is signing these agreements. This is an industry-wide phenomenon. So what agreements does Wiley have in place at the minute? You can see on this slide that Wiley has many of these deals in Europe, and these cover hundreds of institutions. But we also have a number in other parts of the world. So here you can see that we have agreements in the US, as well as ones in Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Korea, and Japan. Most of the agreements on this slide were signed only in 2022, and countries outside of Europe are becoming much more involved in open access, and this is going to continue well into the future. If you want to see a full list of the institutions included in these transitional agreements, then you can go to wileyauthors.com. So we've reached the end of the session today. Thank you for coming. I really hope that this was useful for you. If you do have questions, please put them into the question box, and we're now going to have a short Q&A and try to answer as many as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. I don't know if you're coming back on screen. Hey, yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. Yes, I did get some questions in advance as well, so I will start with those. The first one was, how do you write a good conclusion of a paper?
So that's a really good question. So what you want your conclusion to do is that you want it to sum up your paper. So you might want to repeat some of the main points that you said along the way, and you're going to want to repeat your conclusion and your key findings. What is it that we've learned from your article? I think another key thing to include in your conclusion is what is the wider significance? So what other research could follow yours, or how does your results like affect the wider world? I think that's a key thing to try and include in your conclusion, because it shows how your work has been significant. In terms of how long your conclusion should be, I think that's really up to you, and it depends on how much depth you want to go into. But you should probably look at similar article types in your subject field to see how long you want to make it.
Thanks. Next question. Do journals usually say in their web pages whether they have a manuscript transfer system?
Yes. So they should say in their author guidelines whether the journal has a transfer network in place. If it doesn't say, I'd probably assume that there isn't one, but you could always reach out to the editor and ask them.
Okay. What is the primary editorial screening process? Is it done by the editorial office team or editors?
So the way that works is the first check of your article to make sure that everything is okay and it has everything it needs can be done by the editor-in-chief or by a managing editor. And then it's the editor who will decide on the peer reviewers and send it out to review. The peer reviewers might be on the editorial board of a journal, and they might not be, so they might just be connections in the editor's network, and they might be at different institutions. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and you can always put a follow-up question if you asked this question originally.
Yeah.
And then just a comment about the impact factor, that it's only related to the number of citations received by a journal. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the impact factor is based on citations, and it's not the only indicator of quality for a journal. There might be other things that are important to you. And not every single journal will even have an impact factor. So it's not the only indicator of quality that you should look
at. If a piece of work was presented in a conference, can it still be submitted in a journal?
Yeah, I don't see why not. My understanding of this is that presenting at a conference it's not a previous publication, so there's no reason why you can't then submit the article to a journal and have it published there.
This kind of touches on what you were speaking about earlier, but I don't. It was a question around finding the best journals related to their topic.
So finding a journal sort of in your research areas?
Yeah, how do they find the best journals related to the topic they're interested in?
So I think the best way to find this is obviously the things that we've already discussed today, but probably look at your citations. You'll be citing articles that are about the same subject area as your research. So have a look and see where they published, and that should provide some clear guidance on where might be the best fit for your article too.
I guess there's a few questions around a specific, but they relate to what support there is available for authors, and if there are any exemptions for academics in certain countries, developing countries.
Yeah, so you'll find that it's only really gold open access journals, so the fully open access journals that will offer discounts or waivers to the article publication charge. You won't really get that in a hybrid journal. But yeah, there are many countries where funding isn't available for these charges, and it might be that there is a discount available to you. So you should definitely check, and this should be on the Wiley authors website. And if you need any more information, then we can follow up with you after the session, and that applies for any of the other questions as well.
Thanks. Well, a couple of questions around how long it takes to get a response when they've submitted an article.
So this can vary quite a lot depending on the journal and the subject area. You might find that, for example, medical publishing, things might happen a lot more quickly because it's more likely that the article needs to be published quickly. whereas in, for example, humanities, things might be slower. But you should expect that the entire process of getting that first response, getting your peer review, and getting published can take several months, even as long as a year or more. But you should look in the author guidelines of that journal and see whether they state their turnaround times.
Thanks. And question on how peer reviewers are selected to review scripts.
So peer reviewers will be selected based on their subject area. So if your article fits within a certain academic's own research and knowledge, that's how they'll be selected. And like I said earlier, they might be on the editorial board of a journal, or they might be within the editor's network.
Right. Sorry, can I just jump in and add to that quickly?
Yeah.
Hi everybody, I'm Lizzie Broshi. I'm a publisher here at Wiley, just here to support Anna. Just following on from the question about peer reviewers, I think this is a really good opportunity to say that journals are desperate for peer reviewers. It's something that, you know, there aren't that as many peer reviewers as there are articles being submitted. It's a really good way to learn more about the subject and to get your name kind of on the map in relation to a journal, particularly as more and more journals are trying to find ways to reward peer reviewers one way or another. So if you are thinking that you want to kind of get involved in a journal in your field more, try putting yourself forward to editors as a potential peer reviewer. And actually, for quite a lot, it's a great start on the pathway to becoming part of an editorial board and even editor. So I just wanted to flag that up.
Thank you, Lizzie. Yeah, it's really important.
Where researchers have been asked to share their data, the research data, and they might not be comfortable with that in case, you know, how it's used is uncontrollable. Is that a correct concern, or?
Yeah, so I think different journals might have different requirements around data, and it's becoming a bit more common that there is this requirement to share and make your data open for everyone to see. In terms of whether it's essential to submit with your article, I'm not sure if Lizzie can offer a bit more guidance on that aspect. The journals that I tend to work with don't usually deal with a lot of data.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of jump in on this. So yeah, it does vary a lot from journal to journal, subject to subject, and within subjects as well. So for example, I manage political science titles, and in the US, it's generally mandatory that data is provided and is made open, whereas in Europe, that's not really as much of a concern. And of course, this goes back to kind of checking author guidelines before submitting to a journal. I would just follow on from what Anna was saying, though, and say that open data as a concept is becoming more and more common. The idea of being able to share and reproduce and reuse data. Obviously, in some areas, there are ethical concerns, and it's really important that if you are thinking about the ethics, say, for example, if you have, if your data is a questionnaire being given to an at-risk group, that you need to kind of take into consideration the fact that even that may in the future be expected to be open, at least to an extent. So there are a lot of repositories that are popping up now. A lot of institutions have repositories to try and provide safe and secure places for data. And really the best thing you can probably do around that is talk to your peers, your colleagues, supervisors, because they'll have the best feel for what's going on in relation to journals, data, and expectations within your subject.
Thank you, Lizzie. Do we have any more questions, Alex?
We do, we have tons. We'll keep going until we get nearer, but it's great. That's okay, we'll keep going. So, oh, I just lost where I was. Can one research be submitted to several journals of the same subject area?
So my answer to this is no. So you should only submit your article to one journal at a time. And this is really important because it's an ethical issue, really, is that if you submit your article to multiple journals, then you might be wasting academics' time doing multiple peer reviews. You don't want your article to end up published twice in different journals because that's not allowed. So you should submit your article to one journal at a time, unless in the author guidelines a journal says that you can submit to more than one. But in this case, you should always let the journals know if your article has been accepted at one of those. And you should only do this if the journal clearly states that this is allowed. But generally, you should just apply to one at a time and wait until you've had the decision from that submission before submitting to another journal.
Thanks. Is there any platform that could help find other people willing to collaborate when they're writing an article?
I'm not sure if there's any sort of specific platform for this. I mean, there are some academic networking sites. My advice here would be to reach out to the people that you work with, the people at your institution, the people who maybe your supervisor's connections, people who are teaching you or have taught you, people who are writing in your subject area, and just reach out to them.
And does it matter what level of study you're at if you're an undergraduate versus and wanting to submit articles?
If you're an undergraduate and haven't yet received your degree, then it's extremely unlikely, if not impossible, for you to get your research published in an academic journal. There may be other options available to you, something at your institution specifically for undergraduates, but I wouldn't advise submitting your work at this stage to an academic journal.
Lots of questions around plagiarism and what you can borrow from other work you see in terms of the amount of new research versus current research cited.
Okay, so there will be sort of plagiarism guidelines to every journal and big publisher, which I advise you read if this is a concern. But generally, you just need to make sure that everything that every idea that you're using or anything that you're quoting needs to be fully cited. You need to give the credit to where you got that piece of information from. And your research conclusions should be based on your own work, not stealing the findings of another researcher. Which is why it's so important to make sure that your references are complete, that you haven't accidentally forgotten one, and that you're not sort of citing too much without having your own interpretation of these ideas.
What about manuscripts that were written many years ago but not been published yet? Can they still be submitted?
Yeah, I mean, there's no sort of expiration date on your work. If it hasn't been published, then you can submit it anywhere. That being said, a journal will be more likely to publish a work as long as it's still relevant. For example, more work might have been done on that subject area, which might be similar to yours, and then which you wouldn't have cited, which might create complications. And if your work isn't sort of relevant anymore as it was, say, 20 years ago, then the journal might not choose to submit it either because it won't be of interest to the readers. But that really depends on what subject area that you're in.
Okay. Last few. What do you think of publishers that request authors to nominate peer reviewers before their articles are reviewed? Is that
so
something?
nominating your own peer reviewers, I think it's not sort of typical of most journals to ask that, but I think that some do, and I think it's a way for you to, if you know sort of someone who works in your area who might be well suited, or someone who will be happy to peer review, then it's a good thing to do. Don't see any problems with that. And like Lizzie was saying earlier, you know, it can be difficult to find peer reviewers. Your article might take a long time to get published because the editor can't find a peer reviewer to say yes to reviewing it. So if you have people that you can nominate, then I don't see why not.
Okay. Just looking if there's any questions that haven't been covered already. Okay. Oh, there was a general question around if there was any trends around with COVID-19 in terms of the research trends, or whether that has now sort of passed and we're seeing different.
Yeah, so there are a few research trends that happened because of COVID. Obviously, firstly, publishing of a lot of research around COVID-19 and related areas. A lot of that research was and still is made free to read at no cost, so that everyone has access to it. I think in terms of the trends that are still going on, I think sort of making collections that are politically or otherwise relevant and making these freely accessible is something that's still happening. Yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
I will have a good look through the questions again afterwards, and I'll check with Anna here, and so we can circulate any answers that I might have missed. But we're just coming to our time now. Just wanted to say thank you very much for preparing for this and your time. Thanks to everyone who joined.
Thank you, Alex.
You can still submit questions with the in the invitation. There was an invite. And if there's anything else you wanted to say.
Thank you for orchestrating the Q&A.
You're welcome.
Just want to say thank you for organising the Q&A, and yeah, if there's any important questions, then we can get back to you. Any questions that weren't answered, we'll get back to you by email. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.